Hello, this is Whitney Hoot again, and this is my presentation for Performance Task 4, the last performance task of this course, and I will be presenting on DNA technology in the 21st century. The first thing that I would like to do is describe some of the key terms that I'll be talking about and that revolve around DNA technology. So the first is biotechnology. So this is manipulating organisms or their parts to create helpful products. So manipulating organisms to solve problems in society and make society more efficient. So this is actually a very old process. It's been something we've done since we've been selectively breeding livestock to create helpful traits. So if we want bigger livestock with bigger muscles, we might take two livestock that are very large and breed them together to produce larger offspring. However, the main focus of my presentation today is on DNA technology. So these are modern techniques done in a laboratory that are used to study and manipulate genes. I'll also talk about recombinant DNA, which is when DNA from two different sources or species is combined to essentially create a new organism or new type of organism. And again, I'll talk about genetic engineering, which is when you manipulate or alter genes for practical applications. So this is kind of the application of these technologies. DNA technology has a lot of really useful applications, including the production of therapeutic hormones, such as insulin and human growth hormone, also the production of vaccines, such as the vaccine for hepatitis B, which causes liver disease. DNA technology can also be used to increase agricultural efficiency and quality through using genetically modified organisms, or GNOs. So you can create crops that are resistant to herbicides, crops that grow faster, or crops that have higher contents of certain nutrients. This can also be done with animals. DNA technology is also a tool for disease diagnosis. For example, it's been used to help diagnose cystic fibrosis and Huntington's, which are both considered fatal genetic disorders. However, there are considerable safety concerns and ethical issues surrounding this technology. So I separated this into two slides. This one is safety concerns and the next one is ethical issues. However, there is some overlap between the two. So one, you might have possible creation of new pathogens. This could come from combining the DNA of two species and having unintended consequences, or you may cause mutations in surrounding species. So when you hear about when people are using a lot of bleach, and only when you bleach a surface, only the super strong bacteria survive, and they breed with each other, and that's how we get these resistant bacteria. A lot of the concerns with DNA technology surround genetically modified organisms in food. We'll talk more about that. There may be unintended gene transfer from genetically modified organisms to wild species. So if you have a crop that is herbicide resistant, could that gene be transferred to a wild species? Or could you have a gene that's transferred not to a weed per se, but also to a predator of the crop? And this is also a new technology, so we can't fully measure the long-term effects. And you can see here on the left, I've got a comic that I found, which has two small regular-sized pigs, and they say he got the new gene for good fat. However, you can also see how this pig has fins. So maybe the good fat they're talking about is omega-3s, which come from fish. So this pig now has omega-3s, but there are perhaps some unintended consequences. Some of the ethical issues surrounding DNA technology. So a big one is testing these products in human trials. So animal studies have only so much value. We can use pigs, which have similar digestive tracts to human beings, but it's not a perfect model. But human studies are considered unethical, so using human beings as lab rats creates a lot of uproar. GMO labeling is required in most places, including throughout Europe, but it's not required in the United States. Should it be? There are arguments for and against it. I mean, essentially, we've been modifying organisms for thousands of years through selective breeding. What makes genetic modification and genetic manipulation through DNA technology different? Should consumers be aware of this, or does it kind of create unnecessary concern and outcry? Additionally, genetically engineered animals and cloning, these are extremely costly. Is this worth it? Is this a good use of taxpayer dollars, for instance? So I'm going to present 2 case studies on genetically engineered organisms in nature. This is the first one. So one problem is that genetically engineered crops that have been used in agriculture have resulted in pesticide-resistant weeds. A key example of this is Monsanto's Roundup Ready trait. So crops are engineered to tolerate Roundup, which is glyphosate, which is a very common and modern herbicide. However, because the crops are engineered to tolerate Roundup, the farmers are only using Roundup. And this reliance on one herbicide, it kills all of the weeds that are vulnerable to the Roundup, but those that aren't vulnerable to the Roundup will breed with each other and reproduce, and then you have all of these new weeds, so you have natural selection, and these weeds become resistant to Roundup, and these are dubbed superweeds. Another consequence is that farmers are now using older, more toxic products, some that are not known carcinogens, and they're also returning to heavy soil tilling to try and break up these weeds, and that can have consequences such as erosion. In the second case study, we have here the Aedes aegypti mosquito. So the concern is that this is the mosquito that transfers Zika virus, and this mosquito is found throughout the southern half of the United States. You can see on the bottom right there's this map here. This is showing the prevalence of these mosquitoes during the month of September. So you can see there's a lot in Florida, Louisiana, Alabama, up to South Carolina, some in Texas. So this is a big concern. So right now there's a British company that is planning to reduce mosquito populations in the Florida Keys by releasing genetically engineered males into the wild that will mate with wild females. And then the males pass on a gene that kills the offspring. So it prevents the offspring from reaching maturity. So the idea is that the males will breed with the females, and all of these offspring will die. So instead of having the females breed with the wild males and create more offspring, this will result in offspring that can't be productive and can't produce new mosquitoes. And additionally, male mosquitoes can't bite. So far, there have been about 200 cases of Zika in Florida, so this is a big concern for a lot of people. However, there are potentially a lot of unintended consequences. So, for example, there could be mutations. What if all of a sudden they release these male mosquitoes and there's a mutation? Perhaps these mosquitoes breed and then the offspring breed, they mutate so that they can breed. And then you have this essentially what could be a new species of mosquito. It's also, we don't know what kind of impacts these genetically modified mosquitoes might have on other species, such as what if a female, they said up to 1 in 1,000 of these mosquitoes that are released could be female, and what if one of those females bites a human being? Also, what about predators of these species, of these mosquitoes? So what if a native bat eats these mosquitoes? Could there be consequences for the bats? And what I think is perhaps the biggest concern and the most realistic concern is that if we lower the population of this type of mosquito, that niche is just going to get filled by another organism, such as the Asian tiger mosquito. And the Asian tiger mosquito carries dengue, which is also a very dangerous disease. Something else, which is, a societal concern, is that poor immigrant communities and communities of people of color are more likely to be the lab rats. So what has happened is this British company they proposed this idea to happen on Key Haven, and the citizens